Are we filming? Yes, we are. So, vintage Filofaxes. What exactly is a vintage Filofax? Because lots of people have different definitions. I mean, if you look on, I'm looking at eBay right now as an example, and there are 305 listings for vintage Filofax, and I bet every single one of those people listing vintage Filofaxes in inverted commas has a different, potentially a different definition. There's one here that is it's a few years old. It's a Filofax Domino. Now, I'm not going to judge as to whether or not the seller, the potential seller of the vendor of that Filofax Domino is selling a vintage Filofax or not. There's no clear definition, although personally, as you would expect, I would not categorise a Filofax Domino as vintage. But equally, I would not, and I want you to hold this thought, because up until very recently, maybe a year ago, something like that, my definition of a vintage Filofax was one that was made in England up until manufacturing was contracted out to other countries. But just consider the fact that I have now changed my mind, and this is a personal thing, but I want to share with you some thoughts about this, because it's probably something that other people have thought about too. I've written down this definition, and of all the definitions I've looked at this evening, this is the one that most fits what I consider to be the definition of vintage. The time that something of quality was produced. And that's the key thing here. Quality, the time that something of quality was produced. Now, notwithstanding the 305 listings on eBay this evening, I want to share with you my view from a slightly different perspective. And it's a perspective as a in another lifetime. I mean, I still do a little bit now, but I'm kind of retired now. As an antiques dealer, how do we as antiques dealers regard the whole vintage thing? Well, I'll tell you what. If you think that there's a lot of discussion going on amongst Filofax enthusiasts, that's nothing compared to vintage dealers. If you can add the word vintage to any item, there's a potential to get more money for it. It's as simple as that. It is the wild west of the word vintage as far as the definition is concerned. So some people think 20 years, others 30, 40, 50 years. So between 20 and 50 years is fair game. And if you can describe it as vintage, potentially you'll get more money for it. Regardless of, I mean, the only other, it's a word that it's a descriptive term that is overused in my book. Closely followed by the word retro. Have something that's retro and it will sell for more money. So there's no precise definition, some cutoff between retro and vintage and antique. Well, antique generally the consensus is 100 years, but I've seen things that are 5 years old that are referred to as antique. It's unbelievable. You would not believe it. Maybe you do. So I take this whole vintage thing with a pinch of salt, but it is an interesting exercise. I have a few favourite models that, although people may associate me sometimes with English-made Filofaxes, I do have I have a passion for some models that were actually not made in the UK. The Portland, fantastic leather, really good. Kensington, another one which is excellent. I have a few Portlands, I have a few Kensingtons, and I have a few Lyndhursts. They're all excellent models that were not manufactured here in the UK, in England. They were manufactured abroad. Do they fulfill my definition of vintage? Well, I mean, to be honest, some of them are old enough. They're actually older than some of the viewers that are watching this now. So would they be vintage? Well, I would say, in my opinion, and I didn't think this wouldn't have fitted my category a year ago, but now, personally, my opinion is they do, and I want to give an example to back up my view that it is not specifically English-made Filofaxes that are vintage. You take champagne. You look at my original definition, the time that something of quality was produced. Now, we have good vintages of champagne and bad vintages of champagne. Depends on the weather and the crop, whether it's subject to grey rot or, some other disease. But generally the weather and the disease. I mean, it's just there are good years and bad years. 2001, terrible year. 2008, fantastic, sensational year. And I'm not a champagne expert. I just looked that up on Wikipedia a few moments ago. But it's a good indication of. It's a good example of how we should not be looking at a sharp cutoff, in my opinion. Other people's mileage will vary. But what we should do is, I think, look at the actual quality of the item, actual quality of the item, and then decide whether it's vintage or not. So, my definition. Oh, and there's another thing. There are a few English-made Filofaxes that I don't regard as vintage at all because they're terrible quality, absolutely terrible. And one or two of them I've reviewed. I mean, I'll give you an example. I haven't got an English Filofax that I can show that's really rubbish right now. But have I got it? No, I haven't. Damn, I should have done that. But certainly most of them I would say are vintage Filofaxes, and I do conform to the traditional notion in terms of describing English-made Filofaxes as vintage. To be honest, there's one or two models that I think are really, really poor, and I I just don't see them as the actual year being a definition. I see the actual model and the year, because I'll give you an example. The Norfolk, which I haven't seen in the flesh, but appears to be a really, really good model. And the original, even though it's not an original, but we all know it's called the original. That looks pretty good. The heritage models, they look pretty good. But again, I haven't actually I haven't seen one in the flesh, so I can't be the judge, but they look pretty good. Are they vintage? Well, it's a combination. I think it's a combination of age and quality. So I would say, for me, what I regard as vintage are almost every English-made Filofax, plus a few that were made in the noughties, if you like, or the I believe one of my Portlands was made in 1998. I believe my do you know what, I'm on the cusp of suggesting that my Guildford Mini Extra Slim is vintage, but the one thing that holds me back, even though I haven't started using this one in earnest yet, the one thing that holds me back is the terrible flaw. Even though it is my favourite Filofax of all time because of the form factor. It's very unique, the smallest one ever made. I don't really consider it to be vintage simply because the leather in it is absolutely awful. That can't be vintage if you are looking at quality as part of the definition to which the vintage tag is associated. But there are 3 models that I think that should be, in my opinion, be included in the vintage bracket, and those are the Portland, the Kensington, and to a lesser extent, but I still think it just meets that criteria, the Lyndhurst. Now, all 3 of those models were made not recently, and they're no longer made, but they were made just after, give or take a few years, just after manufacturing was shipped out of the UK, where the quality was absolutely superb. Don't know what's happened since then, and I can't really judge because I don't own any modern Filofaxes other than a few purely by accident. I don't really go a bundle on many of the models today, although I would like to test out a heritage, I must admit, and a Holborn, and there's 1 or 2 others. So yes, I could do that, but is a Holborn vintage? Don't know, jury's out. Is a heritage vintage? Very, very difficult to say. For me, it will be easier for others, I think. But I'm gonna leave it there. So, as far as I'm concerned, just to summarise, a vintage Filofax is one made here in England, in the UK, if you like, with some guest appearances. The Portland, the Kensington, and the Lyndhurst. Those 3. Nothing else. At least for now. But you might disagree with me, vociferously or passively, who knows. But please leave a comment if you think that if you think that you disagree with me. I'm happy to discuss it with you. But until my next video, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.